because it doesn't automatically record. So here with Jeff, and we're going to go through his MBTI step 2.
Hey.
So ESFP preferences, and you can work out Jamie's preferences from her screen name.
Very helpful.
Right. So Jeff, I'll get a little bit, I get a little bit repetitive at times, but some people might not have heard your famous joke about your preferences.
My famous joke, huh? I wish it was more famous so that I would be more famous, but I think what you're referring to is, as you see demonstrated on the screen, my preferences for extroversion and sensing are slight to moderate, but my preferences for feeling and judging are very clear. So if you think about it, I'm really defined by my effing penis.
All right.
There's the joke.
Okay.
All right.
Pause for uproarious laughter.
Well, everyone I show it to pretty much likes it.
It ain't bad.
Right then. So is there anything to say about this original? Yeah, because we're going to get to...
I don't know. You tell me if there's anything to say. I mean, I guess when I took that, I wasn't surprised at all by it, because I'm pretty sure that I had done the step 1 by itself before that, before I did this. I don't think I just did it all at one time, if I remember right. So I don't remember now. It's been a while. But anyway, some people may know that I used to call myself an ISFP because I did get that on test results, but I also misinterpreted what introversion and extroversion meant, as a lot of people do, and equated introversion with social awkwardness and my general not great ability to meet up with the ESFP stereotype, which is that I'm supposed to have like a million friends and all that, But the cool thing is that's covered in these results when we get into the breaking down the parts of, because the very first part of the extroversion thing has part that it says is out of preference for me. So that's the cool thing about this, is it breaks all that down. But as far as this part, the clarity of preferences, it wasn't surprising. It was about what I had before. So I think the only difference, like when I originally took the Kersey sorter and came up as introverted, like when I have taken it, I've noticed over the years that I've gotten more, like the score for E gets higher. But I think it's not that I've become more extroverted. It's just that I know myself better. So when I interpret the questions, I don't necessarily, I don't interpret it as much how they actually ask them, which is they ask more about habits, like, oh, do you tend to do this or that?
Right.
I think about more what's the actual preference, It's like, yeah, I'd love to be the guy that was popular at a party or whatever. It's just not something in my life has usually happened. So when I originally would answer those questions and they'd say something about, do you tend to stay late at a party or leave early? I'm like, well, leave early because usually nobody cares about what I'm doing. So why am I just going to stick around to be bored? So,
I'm just going to post your video, ESFP preference versus reality in the comments, and you'll also get Jeff's channel, folks. There you go. I'll post that in the chat.
I recently rewatched a Simpsons episode, the one where Homer uses the hair growing tonic stuff and becomes all confident and successful and becomes an executive at his job and stuff. And then when Bart knocks the rest of the tonic down the drain or whatever, and he can't use it anymore, and he starts going bald again, he's supposed to make a speech. And like just a few minutes after he starts, it has somebody in the crowd says, "This bald man has no ideas."
Wow.
And I think about that now with my YouTube channel, because when you post you're talking about a link to an old video, and I'm thinking, I'm like, I don't want anybody to be watching that and saying this fat man has no idea, because the old fat me still had some relevant points to make.
Right. Is there anything worth commenting on this? Is there anything? Did you?
Are you going to keep asking that on every slide? You tell me. If you want to comment, do it.
Right, okay.
I had a question for Jeff,
go on,
actually.
Jenny.
So this is something I realized too. I would take more and more tests, and I met more and more people who define themselves by a certain type. I started being able to differentiate between me and them, right? So even if it's like an S versus N preference, if I could see the N preference in them wicked clearly, it just became easier for me to be like, oh, I'm a sensor, like on tests, you know? I don't know if that's an SI thing, the compare and contrast, but I'm curious if that plays out for you too.
I was just saw Jonathan's comments. Homer is basically Jeff in cartoon form.
Yeah, I was responding that I'm pretty much, and it's the same dynamic with my son, because my son is Bart, so it's other than drinking beer, I pretty much am Homer. So we got that Homer Bart dynamic.
I think we're pretty much, because it's going over, not so much talking about ESFP, but this I find interesting. So it mentions here for introversion, directing energy towards the inner world of experience and ideas, but then it doesn't ask anything about ideas in like the subscale.
Yeah, well, as we've discussed before, there are definitely some flaws in the MBTI. I think it's a good start, but I feel like I could come up with better questions if I really worked on it, if I cared that much. But yeah, this graphic shows what I was talking about earlier, that the very first part of that, that it has initiating versus receiving. I'm in the out of preference towards the receiving. Reserved, low-key are introduced versus sociable, congenial, introduced people. So yeah, I'm not good at initiating. And some of that's probably circumstance, just in the way I grew up. But I don't know how much is inborn and how much is
I mean, it'd be interesting to look at people, if like how much that relates to someone's self-confidence, like how initiating they are.
And I think that's the number one thing that would make people, including myself, think I was an introvert, is because that part of it can be such a, that's what people tend to notice the most out of these things. Because it's often when you encounter people, that's all that you really have is like, how are they initially with people? That may be the only interaction you ever really have with that person, is that first impression. So this is kind of the first impression part.
It seems like the social extroversion versus social introversion right there, basically.
But Jeff, what would it be like for your son, Jeff? Because he seems quite a confident man, your son. So how would he be on that one for the initiating receiver?
Well, he's more initiating than I am, but still probably not like all the way to the other side. Because his initiating is different. That's the thing with ESTP, is it's like he tends to initiate just by sort of barreling through things. I mean, just sort of he makes his presence known, but he's not concerned about like friendliness with people. He's initiating, and that's the difference. Is that if I'm trying to initiate, I'm trying to like appeal to people's feelings and being friendly about it, whereas he's just like, I'm gonna barrel into this, and by doing that, he gets people on board. So his way of initiating is different.
So what I'm maybe thinking is that if someone is a feeling type, if they're confident, they probably are going to be sociable, whereas someone could be like, say, a confident ENTJ or ESTP and not really care about interacting with people, even though they are confident. It's just that they don't see much value with it if they don't see a purpose to it.
Yeah, my father is an INTJ, and he had certain leadership positions, like he was a scout leader, and so he had to speak in front of a large group of people and things like that. And he had enough confidence to do that, but you could still tell that he wasn't super comfortable doing that. He just sort of learned how to do it, but it wasn't his preference. I think if he had a way to address people individually, he was much more confident in doing that than he was speaking to a larger crowd of people.
It does bring to question too, like, what does a thinker get out of being social just to be social? Like, do they need a reason?
In the ENTJ profile, frequently ENTJs like Enneagram Type 3, and it's like they might just be social, like just to network with people. And so it might depend on who they're socializing with.
Which would be a reason for engaging with people, right? Versus like feeling just you don't really need a reason. It's kind of obvious to a feeler why you would want to be social, I guess, in some ways.
I mean, this is why it's better to like sort of work out somebody's type through an interview, because you could ask them about initiating, receiving, and then follow up. And so with you, Jamie, I could ask, okay, in which situations would you initiate a conversation?
One-on-one, for sure.
And that's the kind of thing that, again, you could see flip the other direction, where someone who overall is an introvert, like my mother, for instance, is an INFJ, and she's much better at initiating than I am. And so it's likely that she would end up on that side of that, but then more of the other things would be on the introversion side. So that's an area where someone who just observed us, and you said, okay, one of these is an introvert, one's an extrovert, most people would probably say, if they just observed us trying to like initiate conversations with strangers, they would say she's the extrovert because she seems much more comfortable doing that. But it isn't really the case. It's just that particular element of her she's just better at that, and whereas like I have to kind of be more in my element. Like, so I could talk to somebody, strangers or whatever, much longer and be more comfortable. She would not be comfortable doing that for a long period of time, but she's better at that initial, introducing herself, asking questions to get information or whatever, that kind of thing, than I am.
Right, yeah.
And, the rest of this, like the parts where I am, in preference, according to this, even that, like on the expressive, it says demonstrative, easier to know, self-revealing. Again, there's certain circumstances where that's easier to do. And that's the thing why I always feel like everything is situational, because it's like, yeah, I love to talk about myself. You know that. But I have also had people tell me or say about me to other people that I was hard to get to know, which it says is on the other side. I don't think I am, but people's impressions of that is affected by different things. And they may feel like, oh, if the time that they encountered me, I seem to be keeping to myself, or I wasn't like volunteering a bunch of information, oh, well, he, is private or doesn't like to share himself. When that isn't really the case. It's just they didn't really engage me in a way that brought those things out.
Yes. Yeah.
And part of that is that I feel like I don't know how comfortable someone is. I don't know how interested someone is to hear about me. And so I consider that when I start talking, especially if I'm not getting a response. That's the thing. And this is something Kersey talked about in Brains and Careers. He had the thing where he called the ESFPs the tactical coworkers and said we have to have feedback. That a feedback relationship where we're getting a response for, if I'm just talking to somebody and I feel like I'm just talking to myself, I'm just doing a monologue and they never say anything or react, then I usually don't keep doing that for long because I feel like they must not be interested.
Do you notice? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to. Do you notice? I'll just to say the thing. So what I've noticed with Jeff is that it's whether Jeff can get on a roll. When he's on a roll, and it's if something just turns up in a conversation that can get him on a roll, but if you sort of like ask him a question out of nowhere, and it's like sometimes he doesn't know how to start to then get on that roll because it's improvisational. And it's like getting into that flow. And so that might be why some people say, oh, it's hard to get to. It's like, it just depends whether he can get into that flow.
Yeah, it's like finding my role in a, you know, I'll watch things, you know, TV shows or movies where I'm like, there's characters that have these set roles they're already in. Like if you dropped me into one of those, I could be myself and you would see my preferences really easily because it would just be me in that situation being able to be myself. But the reality is in the real world is that not everything is set up for you that way. So you don't know as you encounter people, you don't know anything about their character, what they appreciate, what they're interested in. You have to get to know people from that starting from scratch kind of level. And it's a lot harder than being dropped into a character role.
So Jamie, you were about to ask something.
Yeah, when you were talking about not knowing whether or not someone's interested unless they give you feedback, I was just curious if you're able to pick up on nonverbal cues or not. Like that's something that I pay attention to, but I'm wondering if that's more in the line of FE. Or...
Sure, I would say if somebody is obvious with those, I mean, I may not get like super subtle ones, but you know, things that I tend to go for is that, you know, I'm saying a lot of things that I'm hoping somebody will smile or laugh in response to. So if they do, then I obviously gives me a good clue. But obviously somebody could be faking that, pretending that they're amused when they're really not because they think it's what they're supposed to be doing. You know, obviously I like it much better if it's genuine, but I may not be able to tell. But if somebody has just, I know that some people can actually be amused or appreciate stuff and still kind of stay stone-faced, so that's a little harder. But if I know the person and I know that's just how they always are, then obviously, you know, I can pick up those things, you know, without necessarily needing to see the physical clues. You know, one of my better friends growing up, another INTJ, I believe, he was definitely not demonstrative in his responses to things most of the time. So if I actually did get him to like physically respond, then I knew it was really funny. Because
it's a big deal, yeah.
Yeah, most of the time he didn't have a real outward reaction, but yeah, he did this thing where he would sort of kind of look like he was gritting his teeth, and that was actually a laugh. And right. But if I knew it was really funny if he would sort of like pound his fist down a little bit, like when he thought something was funny. So that was that combo. I'm like, it's kind of the same thing with my my INTP older brother because you know, a lot of our conversations are in text. We don't live in the same place, and so he kind of has this. Ben and I talked about this before. The sort of tier of responses of like whether, you know, he actually thought something was that amusing or not, because he'll have like the heh response. Yeah. And then, you know, it'll actually be like a ha-ha or an LOL or something like that. It's like, if it actually gets to that level, then I mean, I know he actually laughed out loud. He doesn't use those frivolously like a lot of people do.
Yeah. It's like somebody on Facebook who likes everything. It's like, well, what does that then mean? It's like, then if you don't get a like from that person, have I offended them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's see. I guess we talked about the expressive part, gregarious versus intimate. So that's another kind of interesting one, because even though it had me over entirely on the gregarious side, I do sort of seek individuals, but I like it. I basically see groups as just being a larger group of individuals. So I kind of just, in the way that I view things, I view people as individuals and not as groups. So to me, it's just sort of like, I don't have the desire. I think it's more of a guardian thing to want to belong to a group, quote unquote. I just sort of look at it as I like people individually, and the more of them there are that are paying attention to me and giving me engagement, then the more fun it is. So it's not as much wanting to belong in that sense. I think maybe it goes back to what I said before about having a role. So it feels like if I have a group of people that I have that role of, I'm the comic relief in the group, and that kind of thing is cool. But it's not any specific, I want to belong to a group or have some sort of status in the group. That itself is not really important to me.
Yeah, because I'm just writing down some of the key things about Guardians, because I've memorized some stuff like Kersey has them down as yearning to belong. Mm-hmm. Whereas for you, Jeff, is it just have like an audience that has their attention and their love on you?
I mean, that's the main thing as far as when it comes to a group. That's really what I'm looking for out of it. It's just sort of having a role as opposed to membership is not important to me. If that another thing, it's not it's not something for me to say, oh, I'm part of this group or club or whatever. That part doesn't have any appeal to me. And the next part has active versus reflective. So that it says I'm mid zone. So even though I sort of lean on the reflective side, I still want plenty of the other. So the only thing, and it says something about prefer space. I really don't. Again, that's one that's probably influenced by circumstance a lot. Really, I always prefer to be around people. I don't ever actually want to be alone, but are there certain people that I want to go away? Yeah, sure. There are people that I'm like, this person I don't want to spend time with. But it really is pretty extreme that, like I talked about in a recent video I did that where now I feel like it's almost silly that I even ever thought I was an introvert, because at my work, we have a lunch hour, and there was a period of time where I had two coworkers where when we went to lunch together, they would basically talk to each other and not include me. And what they were talking about wasn't interesting in the slightest. In fact, it was even off-putting sometimes. And yet I would still preferred to go to lunch with them than by myself. So if that's not evidence of extroversion, I don't know what is, because it seems like if I was wanting to do that, so, to the point, where I really didn't want to be alone, even if the people that I was spending time with were not really enjoyable to be around, then to me, that's pretty hardcore on the extroverted side.
What is it about being alone that you don't like?
It's lonely.
Oh,
I mean, I don't know a better way to put that. I think the things that I've read that have characterized it as being about energy are really true. Like, I feel energized when I'm with people, and the more that I'm alone, the more I feel like my energy is going away. I feel, drained, and like I am slowly losing my energy.
Yeah, so that's some of the things with Guardians.
Well, of course, Ben's popped that up, so now I can't see the.
Oh, sorry.
All right. So enthusiastic and quiet, lively, energetic, seek spotlight, calm, enjoy solitude, seek back. Yeah, that's the number one thing, is I don't enjoy solitude, but I make the most of it because I have adapted to the fact that I have plenty of solitude in my life. So rather than go crazy with that, I find things I enjoy doing by myself, and then I don't. But even those things, it's funny because I live with it's just me and my son, and even when I'm like watching TV, I feel better. Even if I know he doesn't really care about what I'm watching, just the fact that he's there and sort of getting some of it, like the fact that he's there with me, like even if he's not really like sitting next to me enjoying the show with me, it still feels better than watching it completely by myself. So even just a little bit of company is better than none. So yeah, I definitely do not enjoy solitude in itself. Calm versus, lively, that just, again, depends on the situation. I can be both depending on what, but my general preference is to be more energetic and seek the spotlight, sure. So.
All right, let's see. Any questions about that, Jamie?
No, my view is the complete opposite. So it's just interesting to hear, you know.
Yeah.
We got a little. I forgot about this. I don't know how clear that is for people.
Well, that's kind of discussing the things that I just did, going through each. Each one, so.
Yeah, is there anything in this that's not been mentioned that's important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the stuff at the top is kind of what I said about, people see me as more reserved, and then because I'm not real comfortable initiating social contacts, but let others take the lead, introducing people to each other. Yeah, although I think I enjoy that a lot when somebody does introduce me to someone. When I remember there was a time in high school. I remember here's my name dropping. If anybody knows the actor Thomas Sadowski, I went to high school with him, and there was a time I was somewhere. I don't even remember where we were because that part wasn't important. But he introduced me to someone as, "This is my friend Jeff," and just him doing that made me feel really good. Like I felt good for a long time just of being introduced that way by somebody.
So, Jeff, I got a question for you. Mm-hmm. So, how would you? Because I remember you said that you once in a video, I think it was your extrovert does not equal social wizard video, and you said that you felt like you missed the school class about how to socialize.
Yep.
With people, and I'm wondering, say for ESFJ, where they sort of know the social etiquette of like how to get to know somebody, would that be useful to you, or would your sort of like artisan viewpoint be, I don't want to really stick to these sort of rigid rules, or would you use them and play with them a little bit, this sort of like social rules about?
Well, I think that's how SPs do use that stuff, is how it benefits them. So it's not as much trying to fit the etiquette as it is, is there some way that I can exploit this in a way that benefits me? So yeah, it would have been helpful to know more of those things growing up, sure. But I think if I'd had those inborn traits, then I probably would have been more an ESFJ instead of an ESFP. That's the way when I think you look at this holistically, as opposed to getting mired in the function stuff, is that you see the basically a person. You can't just like flip something around and say, a person has a stronger function of this or whatever. To me, it's like it changes the whole person if you change those aspects of it. So for whatever reason, I was supposed to not be as aware of those things or not as good as those things. If I had been, I would have been a different person. So but yeah, is it useful to be more aware of those things? Sure. It's just never going to come completely natural to me. It's just something I can observe, but even after, I'm in my 40s now and I'm not good at those things still.
Yeah. So it's like ESFJ especially be very good at the social rituals.
Yeah, I think they're probably the very best type in general at that. In terms of it coming naturally to them. Now, again, circumstances affect everybody, not just me. So it's certainly possible for an ESFJ to have grown up in an environment where some of those natural things were squelched in some way or limited or stunted, where they didn't develop them as well as the typical ESFJ, and they may not be as good at those things. So, it would have been interesting to know how it would have been different, thinking about my parents and how, because I talk about them sort of repressing my natural preferences as an ESFP, that it would have been interesting to know whether that still would have been the case if I was an ESFJ, or whether they would have been more open to the type of things that I would have been trying to do. I think with my father, it still would have been similar issues. In terms of the kind of things that he had problems with, because a lot of the things, like when I would want to play music and share that with people, he didn't like that, and so that would have been probably would have been the case if I was an ESFJ too. Those problems would have been similar.
Yeah, I'll do that as well. It's like, I want to share stuff with people because I want to see what they think of it, and
you definitely do.
I can't remember what I sent you.
Ben showing his spontaneity by going straight to the JP thing instead of doing them in order. He's not bound.
Well, I mean, it's just in the random order of the slides. And if I'd have been more prepared, I would have put them in order.
Well,
okay,
that's what I'm saying. It's kind of a joke.
Do you want to do sensing and intuiting
it's
next?
Up to you. It's you're the ringleader here, so. Because I'm a perceiver, so I don't care.
Okay, well, let's go. Just go with the. Are you okay with this?
I'm a little triggered. I'm a little triggered, but I'll be okay.
Okay, Jamie. What would you like next? Which dichotomy would you like next?
Oh, this is fine. It's just
Do you mean triggered by the diagram or by going out of order?
By going out of order, yeah.
Although we have
specifically the diagram was making.
Although we could say we have been talking about artisan and guardian Jeff differences and SPSJ.
Yeah, because there's a great video. I'm pretty sure Ben saw it when I showed it to him, but for anybody who hasn't, there's a YouTube channel OKA, and there's a video about. How judgers and perceivers approach goals. And it's a great video, but because it's not too long, but it's very descriptive. And the guy goes into some good details of how you can see the way that in real life it plays out, the differences. But one of the things he says is he asks, he does this kind of demonstration where he puts a line up on a paper and he illustrates in sort of visually how a J is going through their day in a straight line and the P is like all over the place on the same diagram. And then he's talking to his audience about, how many people are J's or whatever. And then he asks, when he talks about they both arrived at the place they need to be at the same time, he looked at it and he said, well, is the J, I think it was about something about having to have the closet cleaned out or something at that time. He's like, is the closet any cleaner, because we did it this way, and shows the J side. And he's like, a lot of the J people in the room right now are saying, of course it is. And then he said, there's some of them that aren't even comfortable with this diagram being in the room with them. So I thought that was a really funny thing when he's like just seeing that, like it's a disorganized thing they want to clean up.
I like the idea of both being able to reach an endpoint. They just go about it very differently.
Yeah, so it's a really good video. I recommend to anybody anyone who hasn't seen it, but especially anyone who's wondering about what that actually means, because you have. Again, here I go, bashing the young theists again. But the people that want to focus entirely on the function stuff are always saying like, oh, the JP thing doesn't really mean anything. It only means which direction your preferred function. Well, in reality, it does mean something because it has to do with actual preferences that exist and you can observe. So you can ignore that if you want to, but it exists anyway, whether you want to focus on it or not. So anyway, there's my little rant on that. But you tell me, Ben, what do you want to talk about here? I can't hear you anymore. Is it just me? Can anyone else hear Ben?
I can't hear him either.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somehow your mic is dropped, Ben. I guess he's doing a exit and re-enter thing.
It sounds like it. Mm-hmm. Do you have an idea of what type your son is?
Yes, my son is an ESTP.
How does that work for you? Your dynamic. Yeah.
Oh, I can refer you to some videos on that too, because we've done a lot of discussing that on video, including some that are on Ben's channel. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic because we understand each other very well, except when we don't. It's kind of the good way to put it there. It's like we definitely speak the same language in a lot of ways, but there are points at which we're like complete opposites in how we approach things. So that's probably because he's very strong in the thinking preference and I'm very strong in the feeling preference. So even though that's our only difference from a Myers-Briggs standpoint, it can be a big one in terms of how it plays out. Number one thing is, I feel like everything that I do, I am thinking about how it affects other people's feelings. That doesn't mean I never do things that hurt people's feelings. Of course, everybody does sometimes. But I feel like I'm aware of that all the time, whereas it feels like he does things and then reacts in a way after that to people's reactions, like, why did they react this way? Like, he doesn't seem to ever understand why people interpret him as hostile or even though I've explained it to him many times, he still will, when I will explain the feeling aspect, he'll still examine that from a logical point of view and say, well, it doesn't make any sense for someone to interpret it that way. Like the point is, it's not about sense, it's about feelings.
Yeah,
so
it's like
calm down, Spock.
Yeah, there's an NLP idea of the meaning of the communication is the response that you get. So if they react that way, that's how they took it. It doesn't matter as much how you intended it.
Yeah. I used that. I used a demonstration because it was something that he had seen. If you remember the TV commercials for Mentos that they used to run, where somebody would do something wacky and then someone would question it or not understand why they did whatever, and then they would hold up the Mentos candy, and then everybody would act like, "Oh, okay, then now it makes perfect sense." And that is kind of there was a parody of that Weird Al Yankovic did on MTV. He used to do this thing occasionally when he put out a new album called Al TV, where it was like he took over MTV for this period of time, and he did a parody of that where this guy was annoying him or whatever, and Al just throws him off the side of a building. Where he just falls to his death, and the other guys are like looking at him in horror, and the one guy says, "Al, why'd you do it?" or whatever. And he pulls out Mentos and holds it up, and then they're just like, "Oh, okay." so what
Jeff,
I said to Morgan is, my son, is that if you throw someone off a building, you can't just hold up the Mentos. Like you did in fact hold them off the building, regardless of what your intention was.
So, can you? I think you can hear me. I'm not sure.
Yes.
I think you can. So, Jeff, what's the thing with you and the gloves? I'm curious.
The thing? What do you mean?
I think you were wearing gloves on your hands.
Because my hands were cold. It's as simple as that.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Okay. So I'm wondering, Jamie, how would you score for this sort of like systematic casual?
Kind of in the middle on the first one. Very planful. Early starting for sure. A lot of self-discipline. Scheduled. Kind of in the middle on the bottom one too.
Right.
So the middle three for sure, judging, but the rest kind of in the middle.
So, Jonathan, I don't know if you're able to tear yourself away from whatever you're doing. I wonder how you would be on these different scales. Or we could come back to it when Jonathan is available. Right. I don't know. Sometimes I am pressure prompted, but it's more. I'll just leave it to the last moment.
I couldn't handle that.
I just
the last moment. Oh, God.
It's just like procrastinating, though.
How do you not have like anxiety though? Like if you have a set deadline, like I immediately start working on something if I know I have a deadline now. If you push it to the very end, how do you not get anxiety about that? Like,
well, part of it is like, oh, I'm running against the clock. Will I get it done?
the adrenaline.
It's weird though, because part of me does, because sometimes I do plan it all out. Like you've seen the things like I'm trying to plan, and then other things I'll just leave to the last moment, because it's a weird thing with INTP, because internally they're organized, but externally not so much, because they're not as interested in that area. But then there are these sort of other sort of things which are a bit more OCD-ish and get this organized. It's weird. It's the same with, like, say if you look at INTJ, like the things they organize are the things they care about. So it's not as if they organize the world the way an SJ would, stereotypically. Right, so we can always come back to this when Jonathan returns. Let's see if there's anything in this. Right, anything worth commenting on in this, Jamie? And then
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, it's pretty clear, I guess, you know?
yeah. So what I can ask you about this is, so you know a little bit about socionics, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
So, and in socionics and in Jung, you are a perceiver. So how do you believe that you are an irrational type in those two systems? Is it something about internally? What
definition of irrational are we talking about?
Well, that's the little tricky thing, isn't it? Because the way Jung defined it, it's like the inner attitude, whereas MBTI has changed it to how well you organize the external world. I just wondered what other things that you could cite that are, and say you maybe yourself in comparison with ESFJ, where we could say, oh, I can see how internally I'm irrational in the Jungian sense versus them being rational. I just wondered if it's one of these things that's really hard to see for certain introverts. Because I think personally it would be very hard to come up with a test where you could get an INTJ to score as a perceiver. The kind of questions you would have to ask would have to be slewed towards their inner state and
Right.
not sort of wanting to make it this. But you see, the thing is, because they're an NT, they also want to appear rational, literally like rational and reason and trusting reason. And so a lot of them, they might not even let people know about their irrational point of view. And so maybe for them, the irrational thing is a feeling of where something's going to go, an NI thing that they can't quite put into words or know themselves. And I just wonder, is there, because we can see how you're J externally. I just wondered how you were P internally.
I don't know. I guess maybe in terms of being open to information. Would that make sense?
Could it relate to what you wrote about in your article of SI?
In what way, I guess? I'm trying to link what you're thinking with what I think you're thinking.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of like, it's sort of not coming out fully formed. I'm sort of thinking it's, well, the idea, like you were writing about SI's impressions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you're not so much judging that as how, I think you were saying like you may be living those impressions.
Mm-hmm.
I
mean, once you build an association with an object, though, there can be a judgment off of it, whether or not it's, like the association could be good or bad or whatever. And so already there's an attachment to it that's kind of strict. Unless you build upon more with an object, that's, good or bad or whatever. Like
so
I don't have a good relationship with objects. They annoy me all the time. They're constantly not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
So this could be a challenge for the socionics people watching, right? So you'd probably think, okay, Jamie is SEI, but can you come up with JP questions where she would score as a perceiver? So that would be tricky to do that. So it looks like
You're off topic then.
Yeah, we were talking about JP and how the MBTI did the way they did the JP, especially for introverts. It's like they went against the Jungian theory and went with something that worked better, not perfectly, but worked better.
But yeah, that was my point earlier when I was saying about, things that exist in reality. It's like when I'm always going to side with that it's a good, segue here, because we go into this part about sensing over intuition. And yeah, even though it says I have a moderate preference for sensing, the part there, the parts there are obviously about concrete versus abstract and experiential versus theoretical. You can see I'm all the way on the sensing side, and to the point that I'm annoyed by people that spend too much time to me in talking about things that don't reflect reality. So. But in the section about realistic versus imaginative, of course, it has me on the imaginative side. So it's not that I'm opposed to imagination or, fantasy type things existing, or people, and talking about them, enjoying them. I enjoy some of it myself. It's people that try to make that reality, or try to be that the only reality, in terms of, they want to speak in theory and not ever apply it to anything.
I remember you.
I think is actually covered by the next page of this that talks about those. It talks about the very things.
I remember for you, Jeff, there was a lot of resistance. You had a lot of resistance, I think, to Kersian typology, but it was like it had to reach a real high bar of this seeming to be really like you, really see you, for you to accept it because of your natural instinct, not to trust the theory.
It took quite a few years before I acknowledged all that stuff. Like at first I sort of, when I read the type descriptions in the original Please Understand Me, I related to the one my mother said she thought I was the INFP, because it was the one that said, like, this is the least understood type, or, this is... nobody gets them, and they're unique and want to do their own thing, or whatever. I can't remember all the words, but I was like, yeah, that's me. These people don't understand me. Even then, I still wasn't like, oh, this psychologist guy knows all these things about me. But I was just like, I related to that image of myself as being...
Right, yeah. Well, there's a theory in socionics that in certain situations, ESFP can act like INFP. I would just like, Jonathan, your thoughts on this.
I have a theory that any type can act like any other type in certain situations.
Well, yes.
So.
I was just thinking, Jonathan, because you're J, but you're also TE break. I'm wondering, where would you score on these JP scales?
When you said I'm a J, I just remembered a little bit of jealousy I got when Jeff went away and his J symbol came up. Because I always... You notice that when his picture goes away, it's a J, and I'm a J, and I just got like...
You're like, I'm the real J.
I'm right.
Great.
So it's interesting, Jonathan. How would you score on this? Because I'm thinking about many INFJs might score as a P if they've got bad TE, bad and practical thinker.
Systematic. I prefer systematic, but I'm not very good at it. So I'd be kind of in the mid zone, probably leading J. Planful. Again, I wouldn't be strong planful, but I would definitely be leading planful.
Well, one moment. What kind of plans?
I mean, plans, visions. Like I envision what I'm going to do for this day.
Okay.
Not necessarily plan it out thoroughly, or I might want to, I might try to, but it gets really boring. This TI stuff. Early starting though. I need a good bit of rest in the morning. Anything. I don't want to start late, but I won't start. I'm definitely more pressure prompted, opposed to, which I don't like. I don't like being pressure prompted, but it is the case. Scheduled, spontaneous, kind of in the middle. Again, like in the mid zone, leaning scheduled. Methodical. I think for most of these, I'm in the mid zone.
Yeah.
Just slightly left.
Right. Interesting. Because I just wondered that certain INFJs might mistype maybe on the MBTI step 2.
I don't think I would miss. I think I could definitely get J
Right. Okay.
on this, but it wouldn't be strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas an INFJ like my mother would be like really heavily on the J side, so that's like her strongest preference.
Yeah. She inculcated the Janus of her mother, though. Your ESTJ grandmother.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that was an influence on her, but so the things outwardly that don't come off J, as far as people misinterpreting her, are things like a lot of clutter in her house. You know, the people that think, oh, J means like you're always super neat and organized all the time. That's obviously not true, and she's the good demonstration for that.
Oh, Jonathan's shown something.
The fact that if she knew I was telling people that, she would be embarrassed by it. Yeah, is the proof that she does in fact have that preference. She doesn't like the fact that she's cluttered. It's just true.
Jonathan, could you do that pan again now that you're back on the main screen? There we go. Ooh, nice shelving. Comfortable chairs there. That's relatively neat.
Relatively neat, but if my ISFJ mother come in,
well, we have an ISFJ resembler here. How bad was that, Jamie?
It ain't bad.
it ain't good.
I'm not going to do that. I used to say I'm not going to pan in my room because I don't want anyone to call the Child Protective Services. But now that my son is over 18, I don't have to worry about that anymore. But but I'll just say that yeah. I tell people, the perceiver stereotype of, just being like a messy slob all the time is definitely not always true. But in my case, it is.
I can't hear you again.
It's the universe trying to keep Ben down.
Basically. We need like some elevator music or something.
Yeah, interlude. Well, I could turn the sound of my football game back up if you want to hear that.
Who are you watching play?
It's from January 5th, 1991, NFC wildcard game between the Redskins and Eagles.
Oh.
So.
Okay.
Oh, yes, that's that thing. Jeff, where you talked about that you've almost got a little bit where you talk about SJs have a natural tendency to reminisce and be nostalgic, but you've actually got that a bit more as you've gotten older.
Yeah, right here on the screen it has the traditional versus original thing, and obviously sometimes that's more about like the methods somebody uses, whatever. But if you go to the next part where it talks about these,
okay, I'm there.
Yeah, I actually thought it was pretty cool how they worded this, because these wordings they're not just these generic things that they do for everybody. It actually takes like your individual type in mind when it does this, and you can tell because of the way these things are worded, like the traditional, original, mid zone at the bottom there, because it says are comfortable following established and proven methods. That obviously is somewhat true, but it says prefer a conventional approach, but are willing to consider an innovative one. So basically it's kind of the proof is in the pudding again. It's like about the results. If you show me something works, I'll do, I'm not stuck to a traditional way of doing something just because it is the way we've always done it. It says are eager to change procedures that don't work. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, oh, well, if their response is, well, we do this way just because it's how we always done it, that's not good enough for me. Like that's not a reason to do something. Value some traditions in family and work activities. And I actually would say that applies beyond just family and work activities to just in general life, because there are things that appeal to me, like, in America, obviously, we celebrate Independence Day, the 4th of July, and often people go and see fireworks or they listen to music, that celebrates that, and it's kind of a celebration of patriotism kind of thing. I enjoyed all that, even when I was, from when I was a kid, like all that was, and holidays and things like that, those type of traditions. A lot of those things I enjoy, and they make me feel good when I'm doing those things. Am I still a natural contrarian even when it comes to those things? Yeah, if there's ways to kind of do things a little bit out of the ordinary, I appreciate those, but it's sort of within the framework of that, which is why I like the way this had it. It says, enjoy novelty when it doesn't conflict with your traditional values. So it's like, I want there to be certain boundaries and parameters so I can like push against those things. So it's within the context of the society being a certain way, I like to kind of mess with it. But I don't want it to just be chaos or a complete different, society that I'm not comfortable with at all. So that's the difference between somebody who's just like a complete anarchist in terms of wanting, just my son, at least the way he talks about things is more that way. We've talked about, like, I wouldn't want there to be just like, the Wild West type of scenario, but I'm closer to that than some sort of really controlled, measured environment. Whereas he says, I do want it to be like that. So
yeah, he'd thrive in that environment. I mean, that's the environment where STPs would thrive.
Right.
Sort of Wild West.
So I lean more in that direction than a lot of people do, but I'm not 100% that way. So that's the difference. Is I want more boundaries and parameters than he does, but I still want to mess with them. It's not I want everything to be structured and scheduled kind of thing. It's I want there to be the existence of that, so I have something that I can kind of play off of.
Right.
That's interesting.
So I figured that out about myself. It took me a long time, but now I can sort of. And then when I did my original video with Celebach, we talked about the very thing, because he grew up in an environment, a very SJ type environment, where he, and when he first did tests or whatever, he would often score as an ISTJ, but he knew there was something wrong with that. He knew he didn't quite relate to it for some reason. So we talked about that, about how the circumstances can be that you're comfortable and used to a certain amount of structure, but that your instinct is always to sort of mess with that. And he talked about that being the case also, like that his parents, especially his mother, when they came to visit, would kind of bug him about the things that he did that weren't the traditional way or the way he was supposed to be doing them. And he actually sort of enjoyed that a little bit. Like even sort of being annoyed by them acting like that, but sort of being proud of the things that he did his own way.
Yeah, and that's one of the things where temperament's so important for telling the difference between ISTP and ISTP, because an ISTP could actually come up with their own system that's quite structured and rigid, but it's their own.
And I see that in my younger brother, because he's ISTP and he's very much that way. And he also, when he first took the Kersey sorter, typed as ISTJ. In fact, I should think actually ex-STJ, because he came out even on the IE things. But the reason he did is because he does like to think of himself as like of having system, and having and approaching things in a logical kind of ordered way. But then he also talks about how he, in something like when he was playing World of Warcraft, like he enjoyed when people's response to him is, "Who was that masked stranger?" So he enjoys making an impact on people within that sort of system that he has,
Yeah. Artisans yearning for impact.
Yep.
Yeah, because that's one of those types that can be tricky. ISTP and ISTJ, and Socionics has a trouble telling the difference between those two, because it doesn't really know the motivations that separate, say, the differences in behavior for those two types. And you can get, with the ISTP, it's their own logic. So yes, I was going to ask Jonathan, is there a thing where the Enneagram 4, how would that sort of play into this, in sort of the originality thing, and maybe doing things their own way just for the sake of it?
That's not necessarily a 4 thing. That's a few different types. Like, A 4 would want to do that, but so would a 7 or an 8. Or some counterphobic 6s, perhaps, and 5s. So doing things your own way isn't indicative of one particular type.
No.
Yeah, I guess before we move on, I wanted to talk a little bit about the other out of preference thing it has there, the imaginative part, because it says, like to apply your ingenuity and resourcefulness to specific problems, do not generally enjoy imagination for its own sake, may develop unusual or imaginative applications that are based on concrete facts and experiences. So here's the funny thing about that. I will very often sort of enjoy fantasy scenarios. And when I mentioned what the football game I was watching being from 1991, that's because I live in two different time zones. Because I, live in the present, but I consume a bunch of media from this day 29 years ago. And again, how I came to that is a very un-J-like thing. It's a series of sort of coincidences that made me arrive at doing that. That just stemmed from me enjoying things from the past. But the point of that I realized with this is that, okay, I'm watching this stuff and sort of reliving it and enjoying it as if I'm consuming it new, as if I'm in that time period when I was a teenager now. But it's still stuff that was in reality, and I limit it to things that I could have actually watched at that time. So whenever possible, it's like reality comes into the fantasy. So it's a very reality-based fantasy, if that makes any sense.
And if it's available in a better quality, you don't want to watch it because you want to watch it how it appeared at the actual time.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I don't want it to be such bad quality that I can't tell what's going on, but I like it to resemble what I would have looked like on the television at that time, as opposed to some sort of remastered thing where it looks too crisp and in a way that wouldn't have been on TV at that time. High definition type stuff it's not as enjoyable to me because that's not what it actually looked like. It's less authentic. But I have very little interest in just complete fantasy worlds that have no relation to reality. It's not that I can't ever enjoy like a movie or something like that that's set in a fantasy world. I can, but I don't. It definitely does not hold my attention as long, and I don't get into it as much as something that more closely reflects reality.
This is something I wanted to bring Jamie in about, the idea of the imaginative. People can be imaginative in lots of different ways, and so Jamie, could you talk about, say, your experience of, say, reading novels and imagining things, and sort of like the SI aspect of that for you?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked before just about how, like, you're reading a book and they'll describe a character. And for me, usually it'll link to just someone I've seen before or some show I've seen before or something. Like, I can kind of construct whatever they're describing based on past experiences of seeing other things. And when I typically write myself, usually I take things from the concrete realm and put them into something. Sometimes it's fantasy, but it's usually based on something real, that comes to mind when I do it.
Yeah, there's also that thing of because we talked privately about this, like when I asked, and I'll ask again just for the audience. So, is it easy for you to imagine smells? Something like that.
Very easy.
Whereas for me, I have to concentrate hard. Is it hard for you, Jeff, or is it easy for you to imagine a smell? If someone said, "Imagine what this smells like,"
imagine vanilla.
I mean, I don't know.
Or like pizza.
It's hard for me to quantify that. I guess it doesn't seem like it's hard, but it's not always an immediate thing.
I think it's easier for me to imagine tastes.
Really, than
rather than smells.
I can do it all, I guess, in here. I don't know. And then the image, if you say somebody's name, I can kind of picture them in my head, I don't know if that's just linking the different associations through sensory.
Yeah, I'm currently fasting, so I'm trying not to imagine food.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think it's difficult usually. But I will be taken out of that by whatever, if there's something in reality in the current moment that is stronger, then I'll be taken out of it. Any attempt to imagine something else.
Jamie, what if somebody asked you to imagine something you've not seen before?
Yeah, then it's hard.
Right.
Then I have to ask a lot of questions.
Can you give an example then?
Can I give an example? Oh yeah, putting me on the spot. I tasted my own medicine.
Ask me about something really obscure. I don't know. Well, like, there's a lot of mythological creatures I don't know of, and so if that got brought up, I'd be like, okay, what does that look like? I don't know what that is. I've never heard that word. I'd be trying to link it to some other creature and not really know.
Because I would think that might be...
You could use I don't know how familiar she is with classic Doctor Who. You could use a creature from that. If
I've never seen Doctor Who, actually.
Okay, there you go. So you could tell her to imagine a Sontaran or something.
Or maybe something where, okay, this is something really badly done. Imagine it done well. Have I gone again?
That's not hard for me because I do that all the time.
We have to do that watching the old Doctor Who.
Yeah, we were talking about that with my family about how when I was watching the new Star Wars movie, that all three of us, me and my brothers, were thinking, like, as we were watching it. I guess it was my brother and my son actually, but we thought we all enjoyed the movie, but we were thinking of cooler ways they could have done things that we talked about after the movie. We're like, yeah, it would have been so much cooler if this happened. Like, and we all pretty much agreed on. I mean, not entirely, but most of what those things would have been. So that wasn't hard for us to imagine as like ways.
Well, I think that's what most people feel like with the new Star Wars films.
I didn't even. Yeah. I watched it and I didn't think that. I went into it and I enjoyed it, and then when I came out of it, I heard other people being like, they should have done this or this, and I was like, well, I didn't even think about what they should have done. I just kind of accepted what was done. Yeah. And
have you seen
that way? Like, have you seen? Should have been, but I just said it would have been cooler if they did. But I still enjoyed it for what it was. I definitely don't agree with the people that were just straight up bashing and saying it was horrible. I don't agree. I liked it. I just thought there were certain, and it's not just Star Wars. I do this with a lot of things now. Is that it seems like in general movies that the writers just seem less imaginative or less original than what I remember as a kid. And it may just be that it's just that I've seen too many movies, but it seems like that now, like I used to get lost in movies much easier and just be wrapped up in the story. And now I'll see it and I can still enjoy the story, but I'll think about ways that it could have been written better.
Yeah, it's part of the setting. It's sticking to the rules of the world and people acting as they actually would in that situation and not doing stupid stuff. It's just like, say, something with Homicide: Life on the Street in a good episode is they act how somebody would act, that character would act in that situation. It's not contrived, and it follows the rules of that world rather than breaking the rules.
Well, in Homicide, isn't that based on real life cases a lot of the time?
Yeah.
So that does help.
Yeah.
And
that's not just that, the characters as well.
Based on the reality thing. It to me, I feel like it's easier to make it more interesting if it is more reality based because you have more to go on than just creating your own kind of world where you just make it up as you go along. That's why I'm not a big fan of like David Lynch's stuff, because it's just like the people that have that thing where it's just, let's just make it as bizarre as possible. Like that to me is not appealing. Just to make something as bizarre as you can make it doesn't make it interesting to me.
Oh, I mean, what changed science fiction for me, what raised the bar, is when they remade Battlestar Galactica and they took a much more realistic approach to how people would act. And it was a lot grittier. And it was like, whoa, this is how you should do it. And it's like, if only those people were in charge of the new Star Wars to actually make it how they made Battlestar Galactica Mark II, because Ron Moore was fed up with Star Trek.
Well, I don't want to see a dark and gritty Star Wars. No.
No, the trash compactor scene was enough for me as a kid. I didn't need it.
They came close with The Last Jedi, and I didn't like that either.
Yeah, but with the Mandalorian, all I'll say is it sticks to it's internally consistent, and it's what you get when the world is internally consistent, what the impression you get is the people writing this really care about it because they're sticking to all of the conventions of the world, which is how fans talk about it. This is why fans get upset when something it breaks the reality of the world. You have to respect the reality of the world.
Before we get too much into the woods on that, I think we have one more preference, because I think we haven't done
I'll go back to
the funniest diagram yet, which is
yes. the finger.
Because this I call my T middle finger.
Oh, nice.
Because it's the only one where I have something where there's this one section that's entirely out of preference according to this. And this is the thing that makes it so that in the typology world, there are people who will accuse me of being a thinking type, even sometimes an NT, because of the fact that I question people and challenge their assertions, and I pick at things that they don't like to be challenged, and they associate that as being a T thing. When, as you can clearly see from this diagram,
you
can be a very strong feeling preference person overall, but have that element of your personality, which I think is kind of an SP thing. And this is sort of my opinion, that the artisan temperament, it lends itself to, we don't just swallow what somebody feeds us. We question everything and want to see the like I said earlier, the proof is in the pudding kind of thing. Show me the evidence, the results, the proof. Don't just throw out your thing and expect me to just say, oh, that makes me feel good, so I'll just believe it. That's where somebody can be a strong feeling preference person, but still not necessarily appear that way, and be very different than the NF types, because I feel this is an area where they probably would be a lot less likely to have that all the way in the other direction.
Because they're credulous. This is what I find is a little interesting irony, is that so ESFP is modeled as TI break, TI blind spot. But the things that Jeff questions, especially with me, is if I mention a bit of theory that is not accurate, he's very good at pointing out where the flaw is in my reasoning. So it's a little bit of an irony there, where a type that's supposed to be bad at TI is actually good at pointing out errors in somebody else's speculative thinking. So I find that an interesting little wrinkle.
That's why I find an error in trying to classify an entire type as strong or weak at a specific function, because to me, there's just so many circumstances and elements where individuals are some people are good at things and some people are not as good at whatever the thing is, regardless of what their overall preference.
Yeah, so I'll talk about a model, and then I'll say to people, Carl Jung did say that functions develop, and the research shows that people can develop and be good at things, atypically good at things.
Yeah, I just look at it more as just people are themselves,
Yeah.
They're not models or diagrams, and you can use those things to kind of visualize aspects of people, but the more that you break it down into diagrams and think of it that way, the less that it has to do with an actual individual person.
So are there times, Jeff, where that causes some friction for you with other people, the questioning?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I've had people get extremely angry at me for doing that. But the difference is, I think that, for instance, again, my son that I was talking about earlier, as an ESTP, he's probably got that all the way on that side too. If he were to take this, but most of those other things would be also, he would be on the T side. And his approach, I think, probably rubs people the wrong way more so because he kind of always comes on strong in that way. Whereas I tend to try to get to know a person first before I am more that way. I tend to try to ask questions or lead them in directions where I'm being friendly and we're establishing kind of a rapport with each other before I really start getting more challenging. So the times that this happens more often usually happens in online discussions where it's kind of more, I get a cut to the chase faster because it's more about a topic being discussed than it is really a one-on-one discussion with a person. When I am talking one-on-one with somebody, I'll try to do that the same way. But if someone just makes these pronouncements, and this happens again in the typology world a lot, because people will just state something and they have no evidence to back it up. Their evidence is, oh, well, that's what the theory said, or that's what Jung said, but it's like, but that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you what your actual evidence of this is. And so many times people change the subject, or they react in like a hostile way where it's not about defending the actual thing or showing the actual evidence. It's then becomes about me and discrediting me. Or saying, in the ESFP group, I have people that will turn around and say, oh, I'm not actually an ESFP.
But to me,
the evidence of that is me not swallowing a theory about how all ESFPs are, which is ridiculous. When you think about it, that's evidence for me being an ESFP, that I'm not just going to accept that.
I did the first video I did with Jeff. I was going through model A of ESFP, and we were arguing about the model, and I said, this is what the model predicts.
Yeah. And that's what I've come, like I said earlier, I've come to accept about myself, that I can be categorized, I can be diagrammed, like is on the screen right now. And I've come to appreciate the fact that when those things are done, if it is accurate, like I believe this one is, then it's a great thing, because it focuses attention on me and I can talk about myself.
Yeah.
If it's inaccurate, then I'm going to point out why, which, so I almost did a response video, but I was too lazy, haven't got around to it, to that discussion that Ben and some other people did in that video about objective personality. Because, he was trying to like make a case. I can't even. It had so many gobbledygook things in there about like masculine and feminine functions and a bunch of other goofy stuff. But then when they were talking about me, that's where if I would been in the video, I would have said, no, I know myself better than you, and I'm not this thing that you're saying. That's the thing that I would respond to. The other thing I would say is Ben tried to say that I have all these nerdy interests. And only one he cited was Doctor Who, and I'm like, Doctor Who's not even that nerdy, So most real nerds are like, Doctor Who's not, really our thing, So it's much more mass appeal than really like hardcore sci-fi stuff. So
Jeff, I'm not going to give you full points for your impression of me.
Well, that's fine. I've never claimed I did a great impression of you. You're a little bit more difficult than some people. Though I do, every time I watch Letterman and I listen to Paul Schaefer, I think I may get a little better, because like I said, he reminds me of you so much that almost to the point I have myself wondering if Paul Schaefer is really an INTP.
What's his name? Paul what? Schaefer?
Yeah. David Letterman's band leader.
I remember. Yeah, he's got a different face. His face is rounder than mine.
Well, I didn't say your faces are identical.
Right, that guy.
I just said he reminds me of you.
Some
of the mannerisms and some of the ways he responds to Letterman are very much like a similar dynamic to you and me, actually, in some of the ways they interact.
So what I tend to do is I will generalize, and I will put things out there, knowing that it's very speculative. But I'm wondering, what will Jeff think of this? And just putting it out there as a notion. Not as something as this is dogmatically true. I just put it out there.
The other thing you said was in your evidence of how emo I am, you said I cry over soap operas every day. That's not true. Not every day. It has to be something pretty compelling in the soap opera to actually get me to cry. So it does happen, but it's not every day. So I had to.
I don't remember I saying every day.
You said every day.
I may have exaggerated, but I don't think you're exaggerating my exaggeration.
I understood why you were trying to make a point about it, but so I had to clarify that in case anyone actually thought that on a daily basis I was sitting here weeping over soap operas.
Well, I don't know if you wrote it in the comments on the video, but we did talk about you, and
I noticed one thing that you may or may not know is that when you go back and edit a YouTube comment, I got the initial notification that you had responded to my comment, but it doesn't notify me when you edit it. So I didn't know that you had added a question to your comment later on.
Oh. And I can't remember that.
Yeah, you edited to ask me if I had watched the part where you talked about me. I think so, but
Right.
if it was more than one place, I don't know, because I couldn't watch that whole video. I had to wade through.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think it was just in one section.
Because that video annoyed me a couple minutes in.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I was already tired of the terminology it was being used.
I imagine that's what it's like for other people with socionics, is the way I feel towards
it. Was very Podlerian. The only thing missing was the hand gesture. So in that sense, Podler is actually more entertaining because at least you're hitting yourself in the head while you're saying your weird thing.
Oh, that is funny. Podler is just funny because that literally is a cult. And they call the guy Coach.
Well, that was what it was sounding like. It was very much in that direction. So anyway, go to the final page of this here so we can talk about that before I end up. So, obviously I already discussed the out of preference thing a little bit, but I figured I'd look and remind myself of what it actually said on these things. Because some of them I'm not so sure about. I'm trying to find the ones that I either disagreed with or wasn't positive. Focus on how a decision may affect what's important to you and others. Sure, have a knack for identifying your own and others' feelings about an issue. I'm not always sure about others' feelings about an issue. That's kind of when we talked earlier about the nonverbal cue stuff. Like I think, and I apply to that too. Sometimes I get a good idea. It kind of depends on how expressive the other person is.
Yeah.
Sensitive to the overall mood in a group. I think, again, somewhat. I can sometimes sort of sense there's some tension going on, but I don't necessarily. It doesn't affect me as much as it does some people. I've noticed that in my office. There are people much more affected by, like if somebody's yelling or something like that, they get much more like bothered by that. Whereas to me, most of the time, if it's not about me, then I'm not not as affected by it. I believe that following your personal appraisal of a situation is the best way to make a decision. I mean, it's not as much that it's the best way as it is the only way I really know. So I don't trust that either. That when it came back to the discussion about like, artisans trust their instincts as opposed to these other things. Like I don't actually really trust my instincts either. I don't actually trust anything. It's just instincts are all I have to really go on. So I kind of got to go with it.
Also, you're probably going with it without thinking, do I trust this? You just do it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's not really about trust. It's about sort of just MO, just sort of my standard operating. Again, trust your own values as a reliable basis for decision making. No, not really. I just it's not reliable. It's just what I do. Influenced by your likes and dislikes in making decisions. I mean, is there anybody that's not true about? Like that seems like that's
a bit weird.
Subjectively decide based on benefit and harm to the people involved. And again, most of the time, yes, but as I've covered a few times before, some occasions if I'm wrapped up in the entertainment, I will sort of forget about possible harm to people involved or possibly offending people.
So where's that one about likes and dislikes? I mean, I can imagine somebody who...
Under compassionate.
Oh, right. Yeah, so... Yeah, I mean,
I think everybody's influenced. There may be people that if it's more of a factor, they may have other things that are bigger factors sometimes in making decisions. But I would think everyone is influenced by
that. To a certain extent, yeah.
Focus questions. Okay, now we're into the questioning section. Focus questions mostly around people and values. Yeah, because my probing people. That's a word I didn't think of earlier. I was looking for probing. Yeah. It's usually I'm more interested in getting to know the person than I am in actually debating an issue like that. And this is where I'm the complete opposite of like ENTPs, because they're like so focused on it's about the debate and what they get out of it's like, how quickly can I determine what side that you're on, what group you belong to, and then debate that side or debate that group instead of it's totally detached from the actual individual. Whereas to me, I do exactly the opposite. I'd much rather learn more about a person than I would debate an issue. Like that in itself is boring to me.
Well, and just an interesting thing that I was listening to it and I nodded, and that made me think there's a book out there, a silly book by a personality hacker, and it said for thinking versus feeling that thinkers won't nod when they listen to somebody else. And I'm like, but I've just done that. That is just asinine.
Yeah, any of those things where they'll just declare like an entire, like, thinkers, that's what, several billion people in the world, and they're like, they all just do or don't do this thing. No, that's pretty much whatever it is not going to be true unless you say the actual thing that defines the preference is really the only thing that they're absolutely all going to do. Otherwise, it's just silly to just declare those things. They're never going to do this. Are typically tactful, but can be skeptical, confrontational, and outspoken. Yeah, that's the thing, is I'm not trying. I mean, is there a part of me that enjoys it a little bit when people are slightly offended? Yes, but I'm not trying to hurt people's feelings. I'm not trying to like make them feel bad. Right. I am trying to sort of get that reaction of kind of the, oh, there you go again type of, kind of, I like sort of having that effect on people, that impact on people, but I'm not trying to hurt them or make them feel bad. Right.
So you said before that you like comedy roasts.
Yeah. Because in a roast, everybody's in on the joke. The whole point is everybody's there to have a good time by saying nasty things about the person, but they don't really mean them, at least not 100%. They're rooted in reality, but the idea is to exaggerate and say things that are goofy and in some cases are completely untrue, because that can be funny too. If somebody has a particular image and you describe exactly the opposite, that
happened with they used to, I think it was an Al Smith. Was it the Al Smith where they would have the presidential candidates would joke about each other, and usually it would be like a roast. But when it was Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, they seemed to really go at each other in that, and it was awkward for the people who were sat there in the audience.
Yeah, and that may be the difference, again, back into the thinking versus feeling, is that thinking preference people, which I think both of them probably are able to do that probably easier without really thinking about, am I hurting this person's feelings or whatever, because it just seems to come a little more naturally for them to forget about that. Whereas for feeling preference people, it probably is a little bit more difficult in terms of there may be times which we think, well, is this going to cross the line or be a little too far? Is this going to actually hurt someone if I say this? I remember on the Comedy Central roast, Bob Saget, who I think is probably an ISFP himself, he said afterwards that the only parts that offended him were when the people kept making jokes implying that he had some sort of sexual relationship with the Olsen twins. He thought that stuff kind of went a little too far. Like he could sort of appreciate it on an abstract level, but the more that they did it, the more he was kind of like, yeah, you guys are going a little bit, too far with that.
And was this when the Olsen twins were a certain age?
I mean, I think they were already over 18 at the time, but it was still, but they were talking about them as children because that's when they worked together on Full House. So they kept making jokes that there was something going on,
Yeah, like that's where sometimes comedians, they don't, especially ENTPs, they're not really sure where they're getting close to the line there and cross the line for a lot of people. Yeah,
Gilbert Gottfried had a joke about them being in a bar and there being a drink called an ass hurts, and just anyway, it went pretty far in that direction. And he said that was the only thing afterwards, looking back, that he thought that there was, was actually a little bit offensive to him. But any of the stuff that was just about him, he didn't take offense to. But when it involved like implying things like him and the Olsen twins as children, then he had a problem with that. But anyway, So that's the thing. This says, may find that your questions are sometimes misinterpreted as oppositional and contentious. Yeah, so that kind of goes back to it. Yes, it does sometimes irritate people, and they sometimes misinterpret and think that I'm trying to just be confrontational for the sake of that, which is not really the case. It's usually either I'm trying to get at the crux of the issue, or I'm just trying to get to know that person and challenge their viewpoint to get, in some cases, to strengthen their viewpoint. I'm not even trying to change their mind. I'm just trying to get them to think about why they believe what they believe. That's kind of, that was the focus of that faith and type series that I did, is that the setup of that was not to try to disprove anybody's beliefs at all. It was to to get to the heart of why they believe what they believe, and not just sort of let people say, oh, well, this is true and this is true because my church says it is,
Right.
and me just say, okay, that's what you think. It was like to really kind of say, okay, well, why do you individually believe this? Is it just because they told you this at church, or what in your life has led you to? And I actually thought most of the ones I did, there were some really good answers to those things. People had some actual, stories of moments in their life where their faith had been challenged and that, strengthened by the things that happened to them. So I thought that was cool.
So it's clear to me that a lot of the things that you get annoyed by are temperament related, especially if somebody paints with a broad brush. Like people from Texas are like this, or...
Right. I don't like overgeneralizations. The more detached from individuals something is, the more groupthink it is, the less I'm going to like it. And some people, hear that and think, well, but if you really were that way, how could you acknowledge, Myers-Briggs types? How could you say, Kersey temperaments? These things exist. Again, I didn't want to at first, but over time, I had to acknowledge that these categories can be observed. So if you basically say that you can't say any of this, then you're denying reality. And I'm big on accepting reality, not denying it. So the categories exist, the patterns do exist, but the point to me is not viewing people as patterns. People are not patterns. People are not diagrams. Somebody... Ben, I think, referenced before the quote about the map is not the territory.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many different ways you slice and dice the information or the theoretical aspects of something. Ultimately, it comes down to people are people. Yeah. So if you're addressing a person as themselves rather than, like, for instance, Jamie here, like it says, you're Chill ISFJ on the screen, if I just talk to her as this caricature of ISFJ, or even the Chill ISFJ, whatever that means,
right?
The whole time if I'm interacting with you, it's because I want to get to know you as an individual, and having the knowledge of, okay, this is an ISFJ might give me sort of shortcuts to certain things. There might be things I could kind of assume are probably true about you based on that. But even those, I would ask you, is this true about you? I wouldn't just automatically say, oh, well, because you have these preferences, you must be exactly this diagram that I'm envisioning for what an ISFJ is or anybody else's. It would always be in the framework of you as a person. And so that's, kind of the same point with these things is I'm not ever going to view it as I'm trying to me, so many people look at it backwards. It's like, oh, I want to ask these things about this individual so I can categorize them and then address them as that category. To me, it's exactly the opposite. The category is something you use to get to know the person.
Yeah. You get a lot of people like that, especially thinking preference people in socionics. And Linda Behrens has talked a lot about this, where it's how you talk about typology. And Carol Linden told me that Linda Behrens would say to somebody, so she wouldn't say about you, Jeff, you are an ESFP. She would say, Jeff has ESFP preferences.
Yeah, and to me, the wording of that is not as important. I don't have a problem with someone saying I'm an ESFP because, like I said, I've accepted the categorization because to me, I can say that and it doesn't imply or mean that I have to be a stereotype caricature of an ESFP. I can be myself in all ways and still be categorized that way. And I'm confident in that. That's why it doesn't bother me. I said earlier about, people thinking sometimes I'm a thinking type. I've been called every one of the 16 types by at least one person.
And at least one person
has observed me either on video or in a forum or whatever and said, oh, I think you're really this type. And every single type. So the fact that happened shows me that two things. One, I take a certain amount of pride in being well-rounded enough that some people, are going to see different sides of me and not think of me as like a caricature of any one type. But also it makes me more confident in my own typing and who I really am, because I can hear that and not question myself in a way like, oh, Do I not know
Yeah.
myself? You know, but I will always ask somebody if they're actually willing to engage me. Well, why do you say that? Why do you think that? And it's not, again, it goes back to that questioning thing. It's more about getting to know them and why they're interpreting it that way than
Jeff,
it is me actually questioning my own type, because I don't. You know, under this system, the way it is, as I understand it, ESFP makes the most sense by far. Does that mean that I don't have elements of other types? Of course not. I think I have probably elements that would fit into all the other types, and that's fine. That just means I'm a well-rounded person.
Jeff, could you tell us about that time? Because not everyone might have heard it. When you were on an online forum and you were answering questions truthfully, but you slanted them in a certain way, so that they would think you were a certain type.
I think you're referring to what I used to. There was a Ventrilo. I don't know if any have used that ever, but it's mainly intended, I guess, to be a voice chat thing, but it also had text, no video, as far as I know, at least at that time didn't. And so I would go in there with people that were on the MBTI Central, later became Typology Central forum. And in the early days of it, they didn't require you logging in with a password or anything, so you could enter under any name that you wanted to. So I sometimes came in as my screen name from the forum, but other times I decided I wanted to observe people under a different name, to see if they would react differently to me, or just in general, whether they would talk about when I wasn't there, when they thought I wasn't there, that sort of thing. I even did some things like we got this thing in Disney World. It's a plush Mickey that talks, called Pal Mickey. And one time I came in as Mickey and just pushed the buttons and had Mickey talk instead of actually ever saying anything as myself. But another time, I would just do the text so they wouldn't hear my voice. And I would say things and people would attempt to type me, because that was kind of one of their pastimes. If somebody new came in, they would try to ask questions to come up with what their type was. So one of the various names I used was Very Polite Cow. And one time I started answering questions for someone to determine my type. And I answered the questions honestly. I didn't pretend I was someone else other than, obviously calling myself a cow. But I didn't lie about anything. Everything that they asked, I would answer truthfully, but I would stress certain things so that it sounded different than my normal kind of personality. Like the ways that I worded things were not the way that I usually talk. So it was an interesting experiment to answer truthfully, but answer in ways that were different than my normal behavior. And when I did that, it was funny because there were still a couple of people that were able to arrive pretty close to what my actual type was. And to me, it showed those people are better at actually paying attention to the things that are answered that actually matter the most. Because I had one person that asked me about like, what's my 5-year plan or 10-year plan or whatever. And it's really those are things where it's really hard for an SP to answer that question in a way that doesn't reveal their SP.
Yeah,
it's one of the quick ways to tell, because SPs don't have 5 and 10-year plans, or even when they do, they're very different than what a lot of other people categorize that as. They're still very much focused on the moment and sort of maybe projecting that into the future, but they're not really thinking in those terms of preparing for the future. And I'm going to be exactly the same in 5 or 10 years, so I'm going to be able to tell you what I'll be doing. The best answer to that ever came from a Saturday Night Live sketch where Tim Meadows played a character that said, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And he said, on a really bitchin' jet ski.
Yeah,
it was a job interview and he responded that way. So anyway, that's one where an SP has to really try hard to come up with something that's a truthful answer to that. That actually answers that question, because it's not our natural way of thinking.
Right, that's good. That's the best answer. The sort of like the fullest explanation.
Yeah, And here at the bottom on this, the very last thing it says is want everyone to feel good with the end result. So that's an appropriate thing to end on. That's,
Right. Okay.
hopefully
So
you
then-
all feel good with the end result. The only thing that I don't feel good about is that Carol wasn't here, so we didn't get into what she would say about it. But maybe we can do a follow up with her.
Yep. We can do a follow up with Carol, maybe about half an hour or whatever we feel is right. Any questions, Jamie?
No, honestly.
Right. Any questions, Jonathan?
No, not right now, no.
I've
Right,
successfully bored everyone to tears.
right then. So I'll wind this up. So I'm going to end the broadcast now. I won't go puff. We're going to be able to talk for a little bit
Bye.
afterwards. So end broadcast and.